thank you, Helen, for agreeing to be interviewed by me on my Homeschool podcast. And you are the leader of the New Conservative Party here in New Zealand. And I've heard you talk a few times, and it seems to me that part of your speciality is a deep knowledge of our education system in New Zealand. And so I'm reflecting as we're starting to talk about this, that I've recently been told, and it's through statistics, that more than 50% of our school children are finishing school functionally illiterate and innumerate. And I find that beyond shocking, and I don't really know how to unpack that. Could you please explain a few things that you feel are what is wrong with our school system? Or in the words of my podcast at the moment, how are the schools failing our children, or the school system?
Hi, Christine. Look, thank you for having me on today, and it's really lovely to be here. But then with your first question, it's hard to smile now, because there's nothing to smile about. 50% of our children leaving school without adequate literacy and numeracy is shocking. There's no other way to describe it. For one, that's unacceptable, the numbers of children that are not achieving. But look, Christine, it's not a reflection of them, but us. And I say that not because there are not good teachers. There are fantastic teachers. I've worked with really good, my colleagues are really good, and school leaders are fantastic. This is Ministry of Education issues here. Functional, I think you might have mentioned functional. Well, when you go out into the real world, they need to be functional to be able to manage and secure a career, as well as getting along with people in the community. Education is extremely important, not only though to be functional, but for a sense of worth and a purpose. And many of those who are leaving school without that, they'll get along, but they're quite aimless in a purpose, and then that impacts their mental health. So this is something really alarming that we need to address. We have politicians talking about equity and poverty, but they need to be held accountable for misrepresentation of that, because of the reality of what is happening with the state of education. Like you've noted, everything starts with education, and education is highly powerful, as we know, for people to function, but also it can be misused for nefarious purposes as well. Knowledge is power, we've heard, and without knowledge, there's those comments about without knowledge people perish. There's all sorts of really good quotes around the importance of education. The question is, though, I'd like to put back, is do we want children to be just functional when they leave school as well? Or should we be making sure that we have children excelling at the level that they can excel at? I'm not a fan of functional.
Yeah, it's almost like good enough. Well, that's not acceptable either. There may be some who are functional, but don't we want them being at their optimum, educated, knowledgeable selves? Isn't that the goal?
Absolutely. And that's why I mentioned we should be setting targets for children to excel where they can. And that doesn't always mean, like I say to my students, you have students with different levels of abilities and passions, and where we have strengths and weaknesses. We're no different as adults. So I make sure that all the students that I've taught, because some of them come and they feel really downcast if they are not, the highest reader, or they know that they're struggling in an area. So I make sure that I set them up really well by saying, look, you may not enjoy this aspect, but we can still learn to, improve that, but you may excel at something else. And so you'll identify for that child where that they are excelling, and all children excel somewhere. We don't have to go around be unrealistic and exaggeration by saying that all children are geniuses. I have heard somebody use that term recently, and I kind of thought, we don't want to go around telling people they're a genius when they're not. But everybody's got skills and strengths, and just like we all have areas that we need to work on. But yeah, you're right. We have to set really high expectations. And I mean that not only academically, but behaviourally. We have got some big issues, and we'll talk probably further on about that around behaviour, or there's labels that are put on children that come through the system. And it's almost like that label then limits the ability of the child because of the adults around them are putting that restriction on them to be able to get out of that. And I really struggle with that as well, because I have high expectations for all children. And I think they appreciate that and respect you for that, because otherwise we are saying, I don't want to go off track here, but if you look at what's happening in politics around race-based politics, and I know that's really big, but if you look at that, and we are giving stats about certain races or certain cultures, we are basically putting them into a boxes and trying to say that they're restricted in that as well, when we know that's a lie, and it's misrepresenting cultures, it's misrepresenting people with disabilities, people with learning, learning, not disorders, I don't like that term, but areas where they need more support. They excel in other areas. So it's almost like there's a victimhood mentality out in the community, and it's pushed through many different political parties, I must say, almost keeping people and holding them into that victimhood. And I get a little bit cross when I see that, but probably going too far in the politics now. Sorry, Christine.
It's okay. It's all just intro stuff for us. So So Helen, why don't you map out then a few things that we can talk about today that really are the major things that how our schools are failing children?
Oh yeah. Okay, it's a pretty heavy topic, this, as you are aware. There's quite a lot to understand about why the system, and I call it the system, is failing our children, because it is not the teachers. It is not, I've said before, it is not the school leaders. They're doing a fantastic job. And if we took away some of that bureaucracy and the government control that are, into the curriculum areas now, for example, teachers do really well. They know what to do. They go through teaching college and university and get trained on this stuff. So they're really well equipped. Well, although, there are some tweaks around that we can do better. But school leaders and those teachers know how to teach and what is best for their community and their students. So it's not so much that they are failing our children or that children are failing. It's a system. It's what's happening from the top, the bureaucracy, the overreach of government into the schools. It's not going to be an easy or a quick fix, Christine, however, because I'm just going to put it out there, removing this government October would be a key factor and a good start. But look, one thing we need to focus on is not blaming all the successive governments. Recently, I don't know whether you heard our education minister, she had an interview where she was questioned, and we know that the system is broken. We know that we need to focus on how to do it better, not the past and talking about who to blame. But in the interview, the education minister, Jan Tinetti, was asked about if the education system is in crisis. And I tell you it is. But she talked a lot about the NCEA, yet the crisis is occurring way before children are getting to secondary school. Then she goes on to mention successive governments, and like I said, we really need to focus on the now. But I guess for her, talking about those diverts the conversation from the government ideological shifts where parents and students are, I'm just going to be real, to be manipulated by teachers towards a woke interpretation of diversity and inclusivity. Then she goes on also to blame the wider issues. And yes, there are wider issues. We all know that. But as long as government ministers get away with this incompetence of blaming everything else on COVID, for example, or weather conditions, or even those socioeconomic areas. We're never going to address what is really happening in our schools. The minister never discusses what is really happening in the schools. And look, we can't wait for the wider issues to be worked out before we start making some positive changes to education, or the education standards and what's happening, like you said, those who are starting to fail. So I'd like to look at the school environment, not the wider issues, if that's okay, if we can start with that, because that is really where the issues are, Christine.
Please do, Helen, go right ahead.
You may be aware, being a homeschool educator and being involved there, of the exodus towards homeschooling was way before COVID. In fact, directly after we started talking about some of this politicisation of the curriculum and alerting parents to these ideologies, they gapped it, if I can use the term, gapped it out of mainstream school. You know, I'd love to know the numbers that happened, but there's a misconception that people are saying that the homeschool has been happening since COVID. I'll tell you, it started 4 or 5 years ago, a massive shift. You might even have the numbers for me.
No.
But I'm going to break it into some major issues and then some that are not so obvious. And if you want to then unpack some of those, that's fine. But I'm just going to outline them first, because that's probably the easier way to do it.
Sure.
At the outset, though, I want to make it clear that students are not leaving without adequate literacy and numeracy because of a phonics program. We know, I say that because we know that that's one of the solutions that the ministry have put a lot of money into recently. And a phonics program is not one of the big issues. So I'm just going to name them: curriculum overload and pressure to get through objectives. That's one. Technology, time on it and the impacts of technology on the mind and learners. Professional development, modern learning environments. There's a few other things: hidden curriculum. But at the top of all of this is the politicisation of the curriculum. You might have heard about the refresh curriculum, and in particular with the sciences. I actually wrote a media release on that recently about the science teachers who managed to, there's a leaked document which I have got my hands on, and it's quite appalling what's not in there. And, you know, the science teachers are reeling over it. So we have the school environment and curriculum that's been hijacked basically by identity, politics, culture wars, radical groups that are masquerading as expert advisors to the Ministry of Education. If there's anything so far that I've said out of those, I'm quite happy to unpack them a little bit more, Christine.
All right.
Is there anything I've said so far that you would like me to address more?
I think we need to hear about the impact of technology you mentioned. I just quickly jotted some of these down. And the hidden curriculum, because I think that could be quite eye-opening to listeners who may not realise, firstly, that there is a hidden curriculum, and second, what is in it. The science one is also pertinent because I too have been following this, and that's really only fresh out over the last couple of weeks that I've seen. And then try and tell us, please, Helen, how these things, this little list, how has that resulted over time to have such a chronic high percentage of reading and numeracy problems? Just help people take some of these things that you've identified and join them together, because that's the obvious thing we're seeing. Thank you.
Okay, how about we start then with technology? Now, technology has got amazing uses, right? We can't deny that. And it's great having some implementation in the school. However, there's a couple of points here. So we have got now high use of technology in classroom learning. whereas there's not a lot of written work. You probably have noticed that, or parents might have said that to you. They don't bring home written work anymore. They can't see their child's writing because it's all done on their digital devices. So that can be a bit of an issue. I mean, some of that's okay, but we've been doing that for, oh gosh, probably close to 10 years, that technology side of it. But I think there's an over reliance on that type of learning and being able to assess children's learning through that. For one, you talked about writing before. They're not writing with a pen anymore, and so you don't see a lot of their working out and a lot of their editing skills or what they can do. I'm actually tutoring some children now as well, and they struggled at the beginning because when they come to me, they have to actually go back to pen and paper and write their stories and write their reports, and it's like they struggle because they don't have that technology in front of them that will do half that work for them. And it's going to be more concerning with AI now as well. We want children to learn how to edit. We want them to know all those skills, but they're losing all those skills and abilities to find words that they need. And as a teacher, if you can't see where they're making those changes, because they want to give you work that looks perfect the first time. And they can do that when they're doing it on digital because they've already had the spell checks and, looked up those words. So they're not using those tools that we teach them at a really young age around how to, word recognition and not just the sounds, but the groupings of letters and things. So all of that foundational stuff that we teach in those first few years is then pushed to the side, and so they're not using it as much. So there's a lot around that, and we can talk further on that. But technology also is impacting their ability to focus and learn. I'll give you one example of even in the early years of the school. So I've taught from year 2 all the way to year 8. So that's 6-year-olds all the way to through 12-year-olds. Now, when I was teaching in year 2, I had a parent who came to me, her young boy. I actually had I was always given the boys because I was really good with boys, and that's okay. But I always had a high class of boys. But an example for this particular 6-year-old, he didn't enjoy coming to school, didn't enjoy sitting in the classroom learning. He didn't want to do his work or reading at home and things like that. And his parent came to me and she said, I can't get him off his iPad. Okay, and I'm like, 2 things here. 1, he's 6, you're the parent. 2, why are parents, and I know some people listening to this are not going to like what I'm saying, but why are we as parents giving technology so early to our children? And I know, look, a lot of us have done this before. We've sat our children in the past in front of the TV so we can cook dinner and all of that, but parents are giving their toddlers their phones to keep them entertained while they go off and do something or while they're socializing. This is becoming the behavior of social change, and whoever said that this is a good thing? I mean, we know, you probably know about screen time, and we could have talked about this a few years ago, which I did actually when this parent spoke to me about it. I had my concerns way back around this technology use. But it's coming out now, with the research about, the screen time of, I mean, it's shocking, let alone what their children are actually getting access to. But I talked about a year 2 situation. I'm going to go now to the senior classes that I teach. They're sitting there, you set them up with their task because it's all about student-directed learning, which also has issues. But, they're doing their student-led learning and their inquiry, which is all very well to a point. But can you guarantee that majority of those children are actually on task, focused, and actually getting on with what they should be? I assure you they're not. And this is also in high school. So I'm in touch with many secondary teachers, and they assure me that those children on those iPads, Chromebooks, whatever it is, they're not on task. They are not doing. children are clever. They know more than what we know about the internet and how savvy and how to get through things. Ask any teacher from even primary school, if you walk up to your students who are all on their digital devices, how quickly they move and change their incognito screen. Unfortunately, we're not setting up children to get the best out of them. And this is on teachers, on our education system, not on them. It's all very well to say, well, we set the children up to be self-regulated learners and to be responsible in their learning. But look, we're talking about children here. If they've got an opportunity to be off task and we're giving them the screen, they're going to make the most of that. Yes, there are a percentage of students who will stay on task and really want to do the right thing, but as well as I do, some children need to be directed a little bit more. So technology is a huge problem in our schools.
All right. I wonder if we should be dealing with the solutions as we go, or do you want to do solutions after you've identified problems? What do you feel would be best?
Okay, so we can do it as we go. That's probably a good idea, because then you can ask me things as you have heard, or as you've heard them after I've talked about them. The other part of technology I did forget to mention is phones, personal student phones. So if we can just add that to the list, because most students now are taking phones to school. And while I know that in the primary, in classes I've been in, the process is they hand their phone to the teacher, it goes in the drawer, and they don't get it back until the end of the day. There are, again, a percentage of students who won't give their phone into the teacher, and it's in their bag, and every morning tea, they're out there in their bag, as best they can to keep it hidden, but they're on it. And phone use is an important one. That's at primary school. You talk about secondary school, they're not handing in their devices. They're not handing in their phones. I've got secondary school teachers telling me that, that some schools have that as a requirement, others don't. Some schools are allowing students, maybe it's not part of the policy, but they might say they don't have their device on them, or there's not enough devices in the classroom, so can I use my phone? Children are clever. They know what to do. So yeah, devices, not only the ones that are provided for, but also those that the students are bringing, like their phones. I would be banning phones. I think we need to ban phones from the school.
All right. That's a very clear line, because clearly technology is here to stay, and we need to figure out a way to manage it. So are you seriously suggesting
can I just put that back though? Why do students need phones at schools? When did we ever need to take a phone to school when you're there to go and learn? Why do we need children with phones at school?
Oh, that they might have to ring mum to come and get them because they're sick. Why else would you need one?
I'm pretty sure the office does that, Christine.
Yes, just like it used to in our time. Okay, so is there any justifiable reason, Helen, as to why a child needs a phone at school, especially primary?
No. I can give you something that's interesting, where a student used their phone and it was actually helpful, but that's besides the point. That was where a parent shared a video that their child took secretively about something that was happening in the assembly, and it was quite helpful that I had that, but that's not a good argument why children should be having their phones at school. Yeah.
All right. Oh. So is it up to individual schools to form their own policy about phones?
I think so, yeah. Like I said, there's a variety of teachers who I've spoken with, and the school policies can change, can vary. Some are a little bit more strict with the policy, and others not so.
So if the schools are reluctant to put in policy, is this something that parents can actually be held accountable for, if you like?
I think so. And if parents, like, you make a really good point. It's one thing for us to sit here and talk about what's going wrong in the school, but we do have to put some of that back onto parents in many areas. Technology is one. Like I said to you with the 6-year-old student that I had, I said to that parent, in a kind, respectable way, I helped you work through how to take that iPad off the 6-year-old child, right? And this is around parenting skills as well. And we know that, some of those areas have some people need to be more equipped in areas in that. And it is hard when technology is such a big thing. Like you said, it's everywhere. We all use it. Parents are no different. And probably we're modeling that high use, or we are modeling that high use of it. How many parents sit out there at the dinner table with their phones? Actually, how many of them sit at the dinner table? We could ask, let alone sit with their children for dinner.
Yes.
So yeah, there's something there where we do need to put that back onto parents. I think parents need to be aware that technology and the phone use is a big issue on their child's learning. So we put some of that responsibility back onto those parents. And if they're not prepared to say, well, your child really shouldn't have your phone, then I would question, do they really understand the significance of, first, why you're sending your children to school? They're there to be educated, not to be social on their phones. So we do have to put some things back onto them.
I think as a kind of a sidebar that's becoming more and more obvious to me, Helen, is the difference in a parenting worldview that's predominant now, as opposed to, say, what it was when you and I were parenting our children. And what I'm seeing is very much, it's almost like an equal playing field between parent and child, that the child is entitled to hold equal authority, if you like. I am a believer in asking for a child's opinion, but I'm also a believer that a child is a child and an adult is an adult, and it's the adult's prerogative to guide that child. A parent is not a friend. So I'm also seeing, I wasn't expecting for this to be coming up today, but it's interesting that it has. I am seeing that some of the problem here is the whole worldview behind large chunks of modern parenting. So I'll just drop that one in there too. Now, those other things that you said, I'm just getting my bit of paper again. What about the hidden curriculum that you mentioned before? I imagine this is quite a biggie, because I'm not sure if many parents even realize what's going on, and even some of them, if they want to know what's going on. But for those who know but don't know fully, what can you tell us, Helen? And then please give them some help to know what to do with this.
Okay, now the hidden curriculum may not be what you're thinking. I'm not talking about some secret document that's that all of us teachers have tucked away, that we're learning, that we're teaching from, that parents don't know about. I'm talking about what we don't see, even as teachers, what we don't see occurring in the classroom under our very noses, occurring in the playground, occurring outside the actual lessons, even within the lessons time. So there's what children come to school with. There is the relationships between those children. We could also add behaviour issues in here. And that's one thing I didn't mention, that as one of the big issues on why we're failing our children at the moment. And I really should have, because behaviour is huge in many ways. And so what is happening within that hidden curriculum that we talk about impacts the learning, or the ability for those students to actually retain information through those lessons anyway, whether it is they are focused on what a student who has come to school that day was displaying really poor behaviour management, or whether it is what that student has come to school from, what environment, what's impacting them outside the school. That's a bigger topic around what's happening in society. For example, the anxiety. There's a high level of anxiety around students. And so all of that is part of this hidden curriculum. There's optimum things that children need or students need to be able to learn when they come to school. And, part of those things are things like a healthy home environment, for one. And I'm not just talking about having dry, warm homes, but also for children when they're in school, for them to be able to learn and be in a place of learning. We know that the prefrontal cortex has to be in a calm place for them to focus. And if there's things happening in their lives or even within the school, then that can really impact them in a negative way, and that they will not learn. No matter who the teacher is, no matter how well that lesson is taught, those children are not going to learn. So there's a bigger picture here with that hidden curriculum that we need to address. So can I just stick with the behaviour of other students here on this? Now,
Please.
We have, and you've probably heard about this over the last couple of years, we have a high number of students who are at school that are behaving, let's say, more than unruly, where on the one end, teachers' hands are tied. So the modern thing that you talk about, can I say wokeness, of teachers not being able to, I can't really use the word discipline, but remove students that are causing not just minimal disruption, but I'm talking about, potential harm, because there's a high percentage of that happening in our schools now. So teachers aren't able to, they've lost control. We need to give teachers back control of their classroom. For example, and I've been in many classes like this in many schools where some of these students that have come in and they've got a lot of stuff happening in their environment, which is highly traumatic to them. So, there's reasons why they are displaying these behaviours, but that should not excuse the fact that we keep these children in our classroom impacting every other student. Okay, so this is impacting the learning. And now I'm going to say some things here that parents should be actually concerned about. Our learning classrooms or learning environments are not safe spaces for your children in more than one way. So for the behaviour side, I'm not talking about children who might throw a pen occasionally or swear at the teacher or get a little bit angry. I'm talking about full-on physical abuse and violence towards other students and even teachers. This is high-level stuff. Some of these children that are placed, in school each day are coming to school with their own trauma, but then causing trauma on other students. They're aggressive towards them. We often have things called lockdown, and that's not lockdown from outside visitors. This is lockdown where students have been so violently aggressive towards other students in the class, where we've had to lock them. This is true stuff. I might expose a few things today, where we've had to lock them outside of the classroom to keep them from harming other students. Now, okay, we might have stopped that harm from happening, the physical harm, but we're still harming all of those students who are sitting there watching this aggressive violence behaviour from a child outside the door or the window, and especially in these big modern learning environments now with all the windows, where that child is out there and all of those students inside, we're trying to keep their attention diverted away from what's happening. That is causing trauma to the children. Parents have got no idea that this is happening. And they probably wonder why some of their children don't want to go to school the next day or are displaying anxiety.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
I would like to assume that would be a rarity.
No, it's not.
And the other thing that I would like to assume is that Well, it wouldn't happen in my school because we come from a affluent neighbourhood, or we're not in a low socioeconomic zone. Can you please address those two things?
Oh, okay.
In terms of the violence that you were just talking about.
These children are at all schools. They may not be at the private schools, but as far as state schools go, it doesn't matter the socioeconomic area anymore. There are children who are coming from homes where it doesn't, we can't just talk about the affluent areas. Families now are placed in all sorts of in all areas across the country. And yes, sure, there might be some very high deciles sitting up at the 10 level, which is the highest, where not such a rarity, but it still can happen. And yeah, I'm not talking about an everyday occurrence, but to be honest, in some schools it is an everyday occurrence. Yeah, so it is a big one. And we're not, okay, if you want to focus on the affluent, they're not going to experience it as often. But I don't tend to want to be focusing on only the affluent here. I'm talking about all these children, the parents who might be hearing or watching today, who are in middle of the range schools or the lower socioeconomic schools, who are dealing with this, and your children are dealing with trauma.
So unless these parents are actually asking their children, they may be completely unaware that this is even happening. Is the school
Correct.
obliged? Sorry, go on, Helen.
No, you're correct. It's become norm. It's probably become normal to your children. So I say that because, gosh, I can't give an exact figure on how many years ago this started to be more prevalent. Let's say six years roughly, that we started seeing a lot more of these behaviours. Now, I think the biggest problem is, like, there were some episodes where police have been called, but it got to the point where, we're so concerned about that particular student who is coming to school with a variety of dysfunctional home life. And so we're so concerned about that particular student that we do anything. I'm saying we is because that's what teachers are expected to do, anything to keep them in the classroom learning. They're not learning most of the time, but we are supposed to keep them in the classroom environment. That is not helping them or us or the students, other students. So this is, probably 10 plus years ago, we would have those students taken out of the classroom, and do some work in another area or another space. I'm not saying that's ideal, but it's more ideal than keeping them in an environment where they are impacting everybody else. So, for example, when I said to you about the lockdowns, they are the more severe, but in some schools, that's actually often happening. So not only are they impacting for a short time, this could be going on for quite some time before that child regulates or calms. And so basically you've lost a whole period of learning, because even though we've managed to direct the other students away from that heated, what's happening, they're sitting there, they're not going to be able to process. And even the teaching staff have just dealt with a highly volatile situation. And so you can't just, you try, go back into, let's have a great lesson now. That's a whole period blown out. And I have been, this is not some exaggeration, I have been in a few schools where this occurs a lot. And there'll be teachers out there that may watch this and they know this happens. So what's happening though with the behaviour stuff, even when it's not that severe, we've still got children or students that should be removed, have that option to be in the classroom when they are performing like this. But what happens, because of the wokeness of the ministry, is we're fortunate we might get the DP to come over, take the child for a walk. They'll go and sit in the DP. This is some of the examples. They'll go and sit in the DP's room, playing with something to keep them happy, that particular child. And then an hour later, they're sent back to the classroom. Now, all very well for that student, but everybody else who's experienced what's just happened has to then just, obviously the teachers welcomes the child back in, no problem. But for all of those others that are in that space, that child comes back, there's been no proper consequence around that. Those students that might have been kicked or hit as that child left the room, there's no apology, there's no unpacking for that particular child that's been a victim of that. And so this does happen so often that your children have probably seen it far too long. It's a norm to them. So yeah, they may not go home and say, or you might hear them say, oh, Johnny kicked off today, and but they're treating it more like this is a normal thing. And I don't think it's acceptable at all. So I'm telling you that the classroom environments are not the safe spaces for children mentally, let alone any potential physical.
So what advice then would you give to parents around that whole area? What should they do?
So that's one where they need to make sure that not only are they talking to their children about this and make sure that, most parents have a good trusting relationship with their children, but ensuring to their children that they can come to them, even if the teaching staff or the school have not dealt with it or just kind of, brushed it over and within that school day, that it's important that those children come to you and tell you anyway what has happened, because it should be talked about. It should be talked about further. That's like somebody committing an offence to someone in the community and the victim doesn't get counselling afterwards. Do you know what I mean? It's like we're not doing anything to help unpack for the students. It's like, oh yeah, Johnny's gone off again, or he's poor Johnny because he comes from this particular environment, so we need to all feel sorry for Johnny. Never mind how we've felt when he's kicked us as we've gone out, or the eyes that he makes at us that he's going to get us at playtime. It's not on. Yeah.
Okay, so part of the solution is awareness between child and parent. And I would hope that with the gathering of more parents actually knowing, a building momentum to demand some kind of change, because
Absolutely.
no parent wants their child to have extra anxiety. We know that there's absurd amounts of anxiety in the community. Why would you add to it? Or put it another way, why wouldn't you try and remove a child from that situation? So after awareness, assuming you choose to stay in a public school, what are the parents' next line of defending their child?
It is going to the school and talking to the school leaders and complaining. And, it needs to be more than one. That's right. You need to have, if there's parents out there who know of a Johnny in their class or that their child's coming home telling them about, then you get with some of the other parents and you go together, you have a sit down, a sensible conversation with the school leader, talking about psychological abuse, talking about mental injury, because this is mental injury. And they need to go and have these conversations. This cannot be swept under the carpet just because the Minister of Education don't want children who are coming in with high dysfunctional environments, don't want them excluded, but it's okay for them to impact everybody else. It's not acceptable. So, yeah, they should go to the school. If they know that this is happening, this particular child or these children may not be in your child's classroom, but then then there's the outside, the playground and what's happening out there, the violence. It's, so parents need to get together and go and have a meeting with the school leaders if something's not done about it, because I have heard of many parents who have gone to schools and talked about bullying and they feel like nothing gets done. Well, then you need to write to your ombudsman. You need to make a big deal about it. This is not a time anymore with education for us not to speak up. this is why our education system is such a mess. And you know, we haven't even touched on the gender stuff yet, or things that are against family values. This is no time anymore to keep quiet, to be kind. This is not about being kind. You need to stand up for your children and actually protect them. So you need to speak up. Now, there was something I was just going past and I thought, oh, I need to address that as well, but I think I've lost it. So if I can get back to that, maybe I'll remember. But yeah, the behaviour stuff that we're talking about is huge, and that's part of the hidden curriculum as well. And you know, this is happening even for teachers. So teachers, oh my gosh, I've seen teachers kicked, bitten, and you know, I've got to say that some teachers I'm appalled at, because they also allow it in a sense where there is no consequence for a child, and whether that child is high functioning on the spectrum, it should not be accepted. I had a new teacher who was in a class next to me who had a high functional person on the Asperger's, and they were kicked and hit all the time. And I said, no, you need to say no. This is not acceptable. We're not teaching that child anything, but we're also, what are we teaching every other child in that classroom about that kind of behaviour being brushed over? It's just, yeah, there's so many things wrong around behaviour issues in the class. And you know, like I said, I can't talk about discipline, but consequences. We all need consequences. Every action that we do, even as adults, causes an outcome. And if it's a negative one, then there's a consequence that we all have to accept and take responsibility for.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just thinking then, when we use the phrase hidden curriculum, and now we've just heard what you've said about that, is the hidden part of the curriculum what the worldview lies behind what has ended up to be policy? And like you mentioned, the teachers' reluctance to say no, is that because the hidden curriculum part there is their actually innate belief, woke if you like, that the child is basically good and just needs a chance, and they really can't help it, and it's a socioeconomic poverty problem, therefore they allow it? Is that some of what you're saying?
Now, that would be the case with some teaching staff, but there are other teaching staff who are not happy with the situation. Like I mentioned, teachers' hands are tied a lot with this stuff. We can talk about modern learning environments. We can talk about this new refreshed curriculum. We can talk about the phonics. We can talk about all of it. When it comes to the ministry do not listen to the teacher's voice, which is quite ironic, because here we are as adults teaching students that they can use their voice, that they can, stand up for themselves, be critical thinkers, which actually is not happening so much now. We're telling them what to think, not how to think. But, and yet us as teachers, as adults, would sit in staff rooms or professional development not having the courage to actually stand up and say no to this, no to that. You need to push back on the ministry. I know there's some school leaders out there who are really good and do push back the ministry. And I know that they turn around and they say to me, they're not well liked by the ministry. But really, what are we doing here? I mean, what is our education system turned into when they get to dictate and the school community has to just appease them when they're not the ones in the class dealing with these children, seeing the impact not only on the learning but on the child, the psyche of the other children, the mental health, the anxiety. So yeah, as I said, the behaviour is a big one, and we've probably used a lot of time purely on this, but it's an important one that I've always felt like needed exposing, because parents, and I know parents are so busy, right? And that's where we have to also, and us as a party, we talk about investing more in family. You've got two parents that have to go to work now. It's and parents are not as available to their children. So we talked before about making sure that the parent knows what's happened in the child's environment that day, but parents are so busy sometimes, and we're not available as often as we would like to be. So one day can go to another, and that child may not have had a chance to offload or to have that quality time with the parent even. And this just continues. It's becoming too much of a norm and accepted. But yeah, sorry, I've probably gone off track. You're talking about the teachers. There are teachers who would be like what you've said, and so we need to give them another chance. And I'm a teacher or an adult who always sees what's happening and want to make a difference and help that child, but not to the expense of everybody else's well-being. I'm sorry, you don't sacrifice everybody for one. We have to address, it's a bit like the crime right now in the community, if I can link it to that. Yes, we know that a lot of these young people, they weren't born criminals, and there's so many other things that we have to put in place to help them. But we do not address the crime and the victims that are being hurt out there because of this particular child who they just, the police can't do anything with because they're 14, so they'll just take them back home and there's no consequence. It's the same thing happening in school. There's not the consequence. They come back to school the next day after they've maybe demolished the classroom. I said to you about the lockdown. Sometimes I've demolished the classroom before we managed to get them outside to lock them out. I've been in some classrooms where we've had immigrant students who have come over from war-torn countries, and they're already psychologically, can I say, damaged. They've got a lot of serious issues, and yet we're supposed to have them in a mainstream classroom with all of that psychological stuff going on in their head. They then get triggered, they blow off, and this is reality. There were 4 whole classrooms once where we had to move every class out and get out of the classroom and left that student and lock them in. Okay, this is really serious stuff. That's one example. There's others with serious, being in the alcohol syndrome. There's a lot. Sorry, Christine, there's a lot of issues. Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah. Oh dear, it is heavy going, and I can understand that the natural response of many members of the public to just not want to know. It's not real. It's a conspiracy. Not in my school, etc. All right, Helen. More hidden curriculum. What else have you got to hit me with?
Okay, so the behaviour one, that's the big enough. Yeah. It's the peer stuff. It's things like having social groups at lunchtimes, I'm talking about rainbow community. There's activism that's going on in playgrounds, would you believe? The schoolyards are not the place for political experimentation or activism, and yet there's some groups who, sad to say, are advisors to the Ministry of Education and have got access into policy. So that's what I mean by politicising not only the curriculum, but the classroom environment, the outside, the playgrounds, where they are holding these lunchtime support groups for apparently rainbow community students. How do you have rainbow students at primary school? But this is what we're dealing with. All of these things, parents don't know. I've interviewed a parent over the last year who now comes out with me and talks to groups of parents about what's going on. For her in the high school, she had no idea that her child was going along to, having these friends that were in this particular group, and then ended up transitioning from her female sex to, become a boy. And that particular high school helped that child. So what I mean by that, and that's a bigger topic as well, but this is also part of that hidden curriculum where these groups, parents don't know about it. It's not part of the actual education curriculum where, you're going to a sporting club at lunchtime. These are rainbow community groups, and this organisation called Inside Out, they have on their website documents that are for students, for young people, to help them to be activists in school. They're encouraging them to go to their school. And for example, this lunchtime group thing, there's one there where they make suggestions to children. If your school is not having a lunchtime group supporting, you can go to your principal and demand one, basically. But that's a bigger topic, I know. But there's things like this as part of a hidden curriculum. There are behaviours amongst students that are part of hidden curriculum. There's learning disabilities. All of that is part of a hidden curriculum, things that are going on that are not part of the overall daily plan of educators.
Why don't parents know that there are activists in the school, Helen? Who lets them in?
Okay, so we can touch on that. Now, I'll just see where we're at, because I did say to you, as well as all those issues, that the top issue that is the biggest issue for anxiety now and for the homeschool exodus is that the environment has been hijacked by identity politics, by these radical groups that are masquerading as expert advisors to the ministry. Now, I'm talking about Inside Out. I'm talking about rainbow groups, rainbow youth. Who lets them in? So we have too much government control in the education sector. It all came about when I found it about 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago now, where I found the new, it wasn't that long ago, the actual document, the Sexuality and Relationship Guidelines, did come out in 2020, but obviously we knew about it a little bit before that. So it came out 2020, and this was all around under the guise of inclusive and diversity. So that potentially might be something we want to talk about in another podcast, because it's quite big.
Yep.
But because of that, that's why now we are having all of these rainbow groups in schools.
So the school doesn't have a choice. Okay, maybe we should just park that one then, because you're right, it is a biggie. But hey, we've introduced it, so we'll go back to it.
Sure.
Okay, Helen, what else is in the hidden curriculum, please?
Well, I think you've probably got a pretty good picture of that hidden curriculum. So, we talked about all of those factors, the things that are happening. I mean, you start the school day off, the bell rings, the teacher's in the classroom at 8:30 in the morning to make sure we're there for the students as they arrive, to help them to settle in the classroom. We kick the day off at 9 o'clock with a classroom conversation, hopefully. And then, we've got our different sections, whether it's reading, maths, writing, although there's not a lot of writing done, as I did try to let you know. But there is, even between transitioning time. So I suppose we could add that hidden curriculum where some of the modern learning environment has impacted. What I can say about that is we talked before about that behaviour of the student pinging and causing disruption. Now, with the modern learning, we don't have those single cells anymore in most schools, where before you might have one child who's got, severe needs and has those behaviour issues, and you can manage it. Now where you've got the modern learning where you have maybe 3, sometimes 4 classrooms all in the one massive area. So take, for example, one child out of each of those classrooms who's got serious, severe behaviour issues or learning disabilities. One of those children might go off, and then that pings all the others. It's so you can see how this can impact. Now, when students are transitioning between these lessons and these modern learning environments, it can look messy. It depends. I mean, a lot of the teaching staff do have it quite well structured now. It took a few years, but it does work reasonably well. However, there's still transition time where, students will muck around getting to the next lesson with the teacher who's just in the next area. But all of that is part of a hidden curriculum as well, because it's all impacting time from learning. Whereas, when you had that single classroom, you had your students there, and it was always you would do your maths, and then you put your maths books away with all of your students, and then you'd get, you had a quick run around the yard to give them some outdoor time, some fresh air, and then you come back and you get on with what you're doing. So there's a lot of things that you could say that are in that hidden curriculum with the modern learning now. The sounds, the fact that there are 5 teachers now, 4 or 5, instead of your 1. And so, okay, I'll tell you the most important thing for a child to learn, and you probably know this, but for me and a majority of teachers, it would be the relationship that the teacher has or the child has with the teacher is huge. A student will not learn if they don't have a good relationship with their teacher, a positive relationship. It's really important for us to know our students and for them to, feel safe in that environment. If they don't have that, it's going to impact what they could be learning. And so when you've now got 5 teachers, people will put to you that, well, that can have positives, because if there's a particular teacher that a child doesn't gel with, at least I've got 4 others. But that's still not a good enough argument of that close relationship, of that building that relationship with that one teacher who knows you really well, who knows every aspect of your learning needs, as well as your family and what's happening for you before, as you come into school. So that's another area that we could, that you could say is a part of the hidden, really. And like I said, the sounds. I mean, the modern learning does not suit all children, and it doesn't foster good learning. You can pretty up an environment. It's not going to make an impact on the quality of learning or teaching.
All right, so around in the solutions area, we've talked and touched on a few practical things parents can do. I'd like to ask you, from a political point of view, what are some basic things for concerned parents, and not just parents, concerned members of the public, to look for when they are trying to choose politics? But also, Helen, I think I would be correct in saying that some of the political pressure comes from the unelected civil service, if you like, that even if we do get a change of government or a coalition that want to have and enact certain policies, how do you get change coming from underneath where things seem to be reasonably clearly stacked?
Yeah, okay. This is big. Now,
Sorry.
I'll start small. I'll start small, and then I'm going to go into something that is going to, again, be alarming. Now, today's not about me prettying everything up and telling you that this is, that we're going to sort this. Parents need to know that there's serious stuff happening. So first, I'll start with what you said about what parents need to look for with the politics going on out there. Obviously, you should thoroughly look at the policy of each party. Although that's not the only indication, and sometimes not the best indication, because, for example, we've got a lot of party leaders now talking about this, some of the concerns in education. So it's election year. They're all talking about it. They're all identifying these issues. We've been identifying and talking and doing things about them for the last 5 years. So you need to not only read what their policies say on their website, but look at what their leaders or the MPs for those in Parliament or for those smaller parties outside of Parliament, what have their candidates done, like really, really done for the concerns that we're talking about in education, because we're just focusing here on education.
Sure.
I don't think I've seen anyone in the last 4 years, and obviously I'm biased because I'm the leader of this party. But look, Christine, you may not know, and your viewers may not know, I only got involved in politics because of what's happening in our school. So I was not politically active 4 years ago. I was still in the mainstream school. I had stepped out of full-time because I saw a need in the community, so I started a charitable trust to help with parenting as well. But I still was teaching part-time. Now, what I saw that was concerning, I put a petition to government, and right from there, just over 4 years ago, I started doing things because of the issues. So what I'm saying is, you might be listening now to leaders standing up, shouting and saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and it's shocking what's happening. Well, what have they done before now? I wouldn't be voting for any of them unless I've seen them. Like I said, I actually had to step out of my career and get into politics to do something about this. So I hope that people will look more at the substance than just on the surface of celebrity type politicians, I suppose. So there is that aspect to make sure that people are really doing their homework. But on the other side of it, so you started with the politics and you also went to something that's even bigger.
The unelected,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so the unelected. So yes, you've got these advisors that are not in there, and we all know about that in all areas. But I'll just alert people to what that problem involves. So, for example, when you've got a party that's the main party in government, like we have the Labour Party, clearly it is their ministers who then go and lead institutions. So, for example, it used to be Chris Hipkins, the Education Minister. Now it's Jan Taniti. So, Education Minister Chris Hipkins, during his time, he was calling for people to come onto their council, I suppose you call it, his advisory group, where then those particular people would then direct the ministry. Or you've got people from the ministry, within that conversation as well. So one example of a person who applied to be on Chris Hipkins' council is somebody who put a campaign together to try and have me deregistered as a teacher purely because I was concerned about the safe learning environment for children. And so because I put a petition, then he turned around and tried to have me removed as a teacher. So there's some real concerns about not only making sure that we remove certain governments, because that's at the top. We have to do that. You have to do that, or you're not going to get a change. There's no way. But it is also things like the Ministry of Education now needs to be completely cleaned out. So I'll just read you a very little bit. I've got it in front of me. This teacher who got a handful of other people and wrote a letter of my conduct, the conduct of Helen Houghton when I put the petition, right? Because I put a petition, there was problem with my conduct as a teacher. I wasn't going to be a good teacher anymore to students because I had a belief, And so you talk before about the wokey teachers or the lefty teachers or something, you use that term where they'll allow certain things. And you're right in a sense, because some or many teachers are very liberal and do go down that track where everything's okay and they'll just brush over it all and they won't address these hidden curriculums as well as the big issues. So this particular person, he was trying to get onto the council, and this teacher is a teacher in a girls' high school, and he opposed, or tried to have me, as a good teacher caring about our students' mental well-being, removed so that he could, because he thinks that all of this gender stuff we're going to talk about another time is actually okay, and that in his perception, with him and his husband, it's okay to teach these girls and all his students this very liberal and highly sexualized content. Now, these are the type of people that we're getting in our school system, or who are already in there. So you said, how's this happening, I suppose? But it's happening because of the different types of people we have in positions. He was just like me, a teacher. But if he had been accepted onto, at that time, Chris Hipkins' council, you can imagine. Fortunately, somebody actually went into bat for me, and this particular person was exposed and did not get selected for Chris Hipkins' council. But you can see how very easily different ones can get into positions where their values are completely at odds of some of the parents watching or listening now. So it's a real, I'm afraid to say, parents have to be so vigilant. I mean, we've always had to be, but even more so now, about who is teaching your child. They may be friendly. And on saying that, I've met different types of teachers. There are some who are very bolshy and really dominant, and you think, oh my gosh. And then there's others who are very airy-fairy. And then there's people like myself who, yes, I suppose I've been described as firm but fair, and I'm okay with that. But when you've got teachers who have far too much control over students, and I do believe they do, and I've thought that even early on when I decided to become a teacher, and that didn't change when I was in the teaching system for 16 years. I still saw that some teachers have far too much control over your children, and parents need to know that. But parents need to know that the schools are not and should not have this much control over your children, and you can push back, and you should. You need to speak up, and we need to say no to a lot of the stuff that you're not happy about. I've recently seen a few videos actually of some parents who have spoken to school boards, and it's fantastic to see. Parents are hearing a lot more around what's happening, not only from me, but they're hearing it because they know that it's happening in their schools, because their children are coming home anxious and talking about what has happened. And so some of them finally are standing up and going to have these meetings, and that is really good. And so I have to put it back onto, you asked me what to do. Well, I'm saying, well, you need to teach it. So parents, these are your children. I can do so much, and I will continue. But there are the activists who are out there, and that is teachers as well, who are saying, oh, but they're not your students. I mean, they're not your children. So I'm trying to do my bit by defending and protecting, and we need to do a lot more of that. We don't have enough protections in place for our vulnerable children. But then we have these liberal teachers who think it's actually acceptable for them to teach your children about highly sexualized content, for example. And yeah, other things there that we'll discuss. So private school or homeschool, I do advocate for homeschool, Christine. However, that's not very fair on a lot of families who can't do that, and who are not in a position. So then it is about helping to empower parents to deal with the school that they're in, but also it's not fair that we should expect parents to go and homeschool. We've got a state system that, let's face it, we're paying for, and who are they actually representing here? So yeah, it goes back to politics. I mean, everything is political. There's some really good people out there who are opposing some of the stuff going on, and they have great resources for parents. There's a place called Gender Resist Education. They're in New Zealand. They have a website, great resources to help parents know what to say and to ask questions. There is another organisation, Family First. They have incredible resources. They've got books where they've talked about, they've identified lessons that are being taught, and they then have letters, template letters at the back of these booklets where you can actually just, you don't have to make it up yourself. You can just use these and take them to your school leaders and say, you want answers, and you deserve answers. You're the parents. These are your children. Stand up in your parenthood, and you're the adult. Push back, take responsibility. They're your children, and they're our children. We are sending children into hostile environments right now. Yeah, I told you it wasn't going to be pretty, Christine.
No, but it's the truth, and I don't think it's a wise thing to hide from the truth. It might not be pleasant, but we need to hear it, because how can you make decisions about what is the best thing for you and your family if you don't know the facts?
That's right.
And I do agree with what you just pointed out too, and that regarding the homeschooling, I think that's a fair comment. No parent should have to feel that they've been frog marched into homeschooling against their will because there isn't a viable alternative. So whilst those are there who do want to homeschool, people like me are here to help and equip them. But part of what the purpose of this series is recognizing that there are parents who want to stay in the public system. Therefore, what can they do? Those who want to move away and go to alternatives, the ones in between public school and homeschooling. And I just heard of another idea the other day that I'm going to pursue with an interview, and that is start your own school. So there are alternatives.
Actually, I agree with you. I do agree with you there, and I think that's something that I will potentially be looking at myself. So yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch with me later, do that. We need to.
Yeah. Helen, is there anything else that you can think of that would be really good to mention before we wrap up today?
I think that two things. Let your teacher know about their code of responsibility to your family. It's not only about what the teaching council is directing them about what they're pushing. It's about the responsibility they have to you. Also, you might want to drop a little hint to your teacher, if you're concerned, that there are torts in law, so I'm halfway through a law degree, around mental injury. So you might want to drop a wee hint that if they are teaching anything, and whether it sounds like a threat or not, I don't actually, maybe that's what some educators need, that if they are going to teach your children anything that is not in line with your values or that they haven't informed you about, that they need to be very careful, because there will be lawsuits coming up, and I assure you there will be. Mental injury is a huge one.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's actually a really helpful and hopeful bit of advice to come in.
I think, to be honest, Christine, I think that's when we're going to turn it around, when we actually start pushing back in law. Yeah.
Bring it on.
Good. I'll be there.
Helen, thank you so much for your time. You've been so generous with what you know, and I just know, listening to you, that there's a lot of other podcasts that we could do, so much to talk about. But for today, we have done exceptionally well. Thank you again. So appreciate it.
It was a pleasure to be here. So thanks, Christine. I look forward to talking again.
Oh, lovely. Thanks so much. All right. All right, Helen, we'll feel